I'm going to do a little bit about harvesting, but yeah, a little bit about harvesting and a lot about using Haskap. So the number one thing to know is if it's green inside, it's probably not right. Too many people get enthusiastic. They see that color and they say it must be done. And if it tastes like grass, and if you don't know what grass tastes like, they're actually, in our superstore, they had in the foreign products aisle, there is grass juice in there, and Booster Juice will sell it too. But it does taste like somebody dumped some grass in that, and not pot, it's lawn grass. So ours began turning purple June 1st, which is actually our first frost-free date on average. So that's the early types. The other ones will come out a week. But usually it could be 10 days, especially if it's the early kind. 10 days later that it tastes really good. And then a lot of the varieties will hold on for another couple of weeks. Right? So there they go. There's a little close-up of that. So my last job actually was at the USDA working on biological fruit rots. And it was so messy and stinky, I was inspired to go back and become the PhD guy himself, right? And never have to do with rots again. But the guy who worked next to us, was into mechanical harvesting. So I got my job in Saskatchewan. I kept thinking, we're never going to get pickers there to come pick up our crops, and what machines could do. So we used to pretend we were machines, and first we would just pick them, but we did this thing with the umbrellas, right? And we shoved them on the young bushes and we whacked them with our hands. And I learned a lot from doing that, because we'd look at one plant at a time, how mushy were the berries coming off. And that's where we found tundra. Look, there's nothing bushed. That's why it was actually spectacular. We had tried a few hundred trees. Well, I found one thing about umbrellas. They're made very cheaply. Actually, it was a year of no funding, or no funding almost. And I was actually one of the guys harvesting everything. And I was the only one of the 5 of us that did not break his umbrella. All the students wanted to go 3 or 4 bushes before emptying the umbrellas, but I wanted to see each bush. So because I emptied it, the umbrellas are actually held on by a thin thread on the end, so they'll break down and you'll buy a new umbrella. So this is not a commercial method. If you were to develop, you would have to re-sew your umbrellas, right? And then you might be able to do that. The next year, were you a part of the contest? We had a contest between me, my head technician, and some growers to come up with something better than the umbrella method. And I wish I had taken photographs of the losers. My technician built some wooden structure with wheels on it and had a post thing, and it cost $500 to make this stupid thing. And the growers had some other kind of thing that wrapped around bushes. And I went to Canadian Tire and bought kids' swimming pools. Now these are actually shaped like a tombstone. They go like this and they have a straight edge, right? So if you prop 2 of them at the bottom and then you whack them with your hands, that was actually by far the fastest, cheapest, easiest method, right? And we also made this thing but for cherries. And all I can say is I had the idea, but fortunately I have people more talented than me to actually build this thing. And this is like a tart that goes up, it's like this big. And it has a funnel at the bottom. You shove it in the cherry tree and you go whack, and mainly you whack the tree and they fall down into the shoot. But that's a little too big for the Haskap. I suppose you could make something like that. But that was, we had some BC visitors wanted to know if that was patented, and we said no. And they said they were going to try it on blueberries, but I don't know if they did. But anyway, for many years we did this. On the cherries, we actually got really scientific with engineers, did pull force meters. But Haskap comes off so easy compared to cherries or other things. Finally, like 8 years after selecting plants for mechanical harvesting through the whacking hand method, we got this kind of harvester. And I hope I've got a close-up. There's a close-up picture. In year 4 or 5, they went pretty well. What I like about this thing, well, first of all, you can't see something here, but there's something that slides out and it divides your row in half. And it pushes the branches, half the branches over here to this maybe 45-degree angle. When it pushes them over, the berries only drop 1 foot at most. And so it carries, it's easiest harvester on the fruit, but almost obviously it's the hardest one on the bushes, right? Because it's got to bend them all the way over. And I also liked it because it did half a row at a time, and as a breeder, I could see what one side of the bush looked like, and the other side is supposedly untouched, right? So for me, that makes really good sense. And also I thought, well, if I'm developing for mechanical harvesting, it's hard to imagine how durable a bush is with one of my umbrella tricks, you know, but to have the actual machine and see the damage. So also, this was the machine that all our largest Saskatoon growers were using. And that was the most popular, and some of our cherry growers were starting to use it. So if this machine could do Saskatoons, cherries, and Haskap, it would fit, you know, 3 of the things in our program. Now, this cost us, we were actually, after the financial crisis, the price on this dropped to almost half. We got this one for $40,000, made in Poland, including delivery and taxes and everything. The guy who bought it 2 years earlier that had lent it to us, his was like $78,000. And I resisted for almost 2 years telling him how cheap ours was. But I found, one of the things I found, if you look at this little part here, it kind of looks like the conveyor belt starts 3 inches from the ground. But in reality, it will only pick fruit from the first time and up. It doesn't backwards do that extra foot. So looking at the original machine, I thought, oh, that's great, but then it doesn't really get that bottom foot. I kind of wondered whether these tines could be warped downward. You know, like if we could bend them, but I'm not willing to do that. But maybe if it could be bent down a little to go 6 inches lower, it would probably do better.
I think they're trying, Johanna 4 has is built for a lower bush.
Oh, Johanna 4 has an adapter plate to take it to within 2 to 3 inches
Well,
of the ground.
there's also an adapter plate over here. Unfortunately, that angle doesn't show it. You can make that have a smaller opener for a smaller plant, but a little, right now it looks like it's in cherry tree mode. It has this much of a gap, so anything taller than that would just flip right out. But the other one makes it only have a foot opener. So that's the other thing. They sell different models of these, and when I consulted with them, they have a really strong shaking motor one, and they told me not to get that for Haskap. Go with the smaller motor, because the big one might tear up the plants. It was for some other crop. This was actually invented for black currants, is the original manufacturer. We use it on cherries, but we have to have a more skimpy cherry bush, not too sturdy. And the Saskatoon growers that use it also you don't need a tree that grows straight up and strong. You need one that fans out. And that's the best kind for that one. I want to show you, like Japan has always been one of the possible customers that will pay a lot of money for Haskap. And when I went to Japan, I was taken to this lady's store at the airport near Sapporo. I forget the name of the town the airport's in. But everything in her store is Haskap, except she takes Canadian ice wine. So apparently she really likes Canadian ice wine, but everything else. And she gave me 2 giant grocery bags full of stuff and told me I had to display this at the university. And there's actually a poster in our hallway that we have immortalized this store. So I want to show you the types of products that they have in Japan. I guess a backdrop to this is that Japan, one of these companies has something on it that indicates they've been around for 100 years. And the main growing area used to be around Sapporo, which has grown up tremendously, and they've lost 80% of their farmland that used to have Haskap. So there's many companies that know what to do with Haskap, but they don't have the supply anymore. And as a general thing, a lot of them are using it, I think they're artificially flavoring it with blueberry or something. I'm not sure, but it doesn't quite taste like Haskap anymore. Some of it does. I think I'm going to do close. Oh, by the way, this is Prince Haskap. Japan loves cartoon characters, and they told me we could use him, but they didn't sign anything. But anyway, a lot of teas and stuff. I think we've got close-ups coming. They did have freezer products. Talk about your jam. I lost this in my closet for 5 years, dried Haskap, and I did try it after I found it because it didn't have any mold on it. And it still tasted okay, but yeah, I attribute that to the antioxidants and the lack of sunlight getting to the... So there's juices. This is a little candy that has one berry in the middle probably. Right, and there's jam, lots of candies. All right, here's a blow. They make wine out of it. This was Maxine's wine. It was already gone. This was a very concentrated fruit juice. I think you have to add it to water. This is just regular water. Haskap tea was made with, they had dried somehow the juice and put it in there. It wasn't like the leaves. It wasn't dried berry. Because I opened them up and inspected, didn't find any Haskap seeds because I would have tried to plant them. But I did that once with strawberry tea from Poland, but I think they had cooked the stuff. Jam was very much, and you might notice not every company spells Haskap the same way. The actual sound is like Haskap, and it's got a little poof at the end, which some of them have PU, but we don't like PU on the end thing. So. But Haskap, they wanted to know how I chose to say Haskap with a K, and the reason I chose that spelling, when I searched on the internet, more things came up with the K-A-P, and also it sounds better than Haskap, I think. This was like a fruit cake that they made. I didn't like that at all. And then they made these noodles, which they said only tourists buy that. And I think that was like another type of fruit cake, so pastries and noodles. Candy, it was interesting, the conference I went to, everyone was talking health value of Haskap, but 90% of what they were making was candies and loaded with sugar, which I'm sure has destroyed all health value. It makes me think of that advertising, memories of nutrition would be the motto. But anyway, chocolate candies, jellies. And there's the one that says they founded 1898. So they've been using Haskap for a long time. Yeah, there's more gummy things and chewing gum.
Those drops there, I'm sure there's no Haskap in those.
This stuff, this stuff here.
Whatever, yeah.
I did visit the factory and they did have Haskap. So I know Haskap went into it, but I'm not sure how much is in there. So Haskap services, there is actually a trucking company in Japan called that, or maybe it'd just be Haskap service. But they have big pictures of Haskap as their emblem on their delivery truck, and that's on the mainland, right? They don't really, it's not like they're delivering Haskap, that's just the name of their company. But they were involved, they do ship some products, but when I talked to the people in Hokkaido, I wanted some idea of what products, if we were in Canada, were to make products, what are your best sellers that we should be making more of? And they said, we have no idea, everything sells. So I really got no sense from them, you know, should we try to make something and ship it to them? They sold out so quickly. Only the people on the mainland mainly don't know what Haskap is unless they go to Hokkaido. If they go to Hokkaido, that's the provincial bush and flower and fruit or something, and it's almost like that's patriotic. It's like maple syrup coming to Canada. So the people that go up there are usually nature lovers. Like that's their wooded area of Japan, and so they know about it. So there's a possibility to get more awareness on the mainland. This is something that in Japan, this is their projection of how old people are, right? So one of the translations of the Haskap, or that's being promoted, or the main thing is that it makes you live longer. I forgot to, I don't have a close-up on this version. But in English, on that can of juice, it says the secret to longevity or something like that on it. Like obviously I have no truth in advertising in Japan, so I guess you can write anything you want on your container. But they're really marketing that the age group, like half the people are going to be over the age of 50 in not too many years. Oh, there it is. Let's see. Golden remedy for the eternal youth and longevity. So that's the pro. There we go. Okay. So one of the first visitors to us were a beverage company wanting to buy Haskap. They said if they had enough production in Canada, they could actually build a plant to take Haskap, powderize the aromas and flavors in it, and it would weigh something like 3 to 4% the weight of the berries, and it would have all the flavor. And they let me taste this flavor compound they made, and it was super potent. But they said that we would have to be a really big industry for them to consider making such a facility. And more likely they would, that manufacturer would like a whole frozen container, which I think is 40,000 pounds or something, I don't know. 28 to 40,000 pounds of fruit frozen delivered to them. There's the Haskap one. Those of you interested in Haskap can recognize how dark that liquid is. As you can see through, it's got a little tiny tint of Haskap in it. This is just more dynamics on the ages, but anyway. Looks like I repeated some of these. So, when I was in Japan and I presented some of my Haskap to the top distributor of Haskap, well actually I should say, I was giving my lecture to them about what we were doing in Canada, and I talked about fresh eating Haskap. And this old guy stood up and he said, nobody eats Haskap fresh. It always must have sugar. And I said, well, if you come to the hotel, I'll let you eat my Haskap. And he actually already knew that I had brought some for a pharmaceutical company to test. Like he was well connected. And so he showed up the next day, and you could tell he was a wine connoisseur, because when he opened the plastic container, he swirled it. And he smelled the aroma that came, his nose was close, and I went, boy, this guy's really into it. I would never have thought to do that. And so he tastes it and he smiles, and then he goes like this. This is a guy like 70 years old, and he says, do you know what that means to me? And I go, I had no idea. I'm feeling really embarrassed. But he says, that means you are a god. This is the best Haskap I've ever had. And he says, I've been all over Russia, and I'm the biggest distributor in Japan. And I was like, really? Because I had tasted Japanese plants that had good flavor, but at that moment I hadn't realized how uneven ripening Haskap was in the Japanese type, right? So I was also a little bit bad that somebody brought me Chinese Haskap that was the naturally bitter kind, and it was really tiny berries. I guess they gathered it from the wild, and they let me taste it. They said, we think they spray too many pesticides. And I was really evil, I must confess. So it'll be on, when this goes on the internet. It'll be. I said, I knew it was the natural bitterness in wild Haskap, but I said, you're probably right. It's probably been sprayed too much. But anyway, it did taste terrible. I wasn't really worried about Chinese competition from wild Haskap at that point. But anyway, there's the good ones. You may not believe it, but I actually made these photographs for Haskap Canada. I forgot that I promised to make all these pictures. So those were actually harvested September 1st or so. I had some plants in the field that still look pretty good. They're slightly wilted, but you can't tell from that picture. Mostly Haskap makes a burgundy juice. It might be blue on the outside, but it's burgundy, right? And there's gelato. If you're a producer and you want to sell Haskap, go to the gelato producers first, because a lot of their products may be 70% fruit, whereas the other stuff might only be 10 or 5% Haskap. Gelato, made properly, tastes exactly like the berry, frozen. Maybe a little extra sugar, a little more creamy, but that's really good. This was on one of some of my last-minute photos for Haskap Canada. Haskap makes a wine most similar to red wine. And we did a little experiment, and I would advise anyone getting into winemaking who's really amateur level, you're not going to hire somebody. Go to one of these wine conferences, take some Haskap jam. This is what we did. We went to Montreal to the Vin Nord conference, maybe it was in Montreal, it was in Quebec. And we let one of the yeast experts try our jam, and we said, could you sell us 10 different yeasts that you would try on this? They sent us 10 yeasts, and it was a world of difference what kind of wine each yeast made. Some were fruity wines, some were boring, some were the dry wines. The yeast really changes the quality. And if you don't know what you're doing, just ask an expert to randomly pick things for you. Of course, we did it with just regular wine. And, my technician was really into testing everything and did a pretty good job. We did fool some agronomists from France who claimed to have come from a major winemaking university. They didn't quite understand English very well, and we're feeding them this. And they're sort of going, interesting, but the attitude, not quite as good as we make at our university. But they weren't spitting it out, right? And we had to repeat several times that this was not grape wine. And when they finally realized it was not grapes, they got their notebooks and wanted this genus species name, like frantic. You know, all this excitement broke out when they found out it wasn't grapes. We also sent it to advanced winemakers at that amateur Vin Nord conference, and they made wine. They were very impressed. Because in Saskatchewan, we can't grow red grapes enough to make wine. But I'm not sure that's a good idea to try to imitate grape wine. I think it would be better to try to make a new go on that. You could make one that's like a copycat, but I think you should be shooting for something that's more like Haskap and distinctively different. But we really don't know, except for what Hamish tells us, that of the first varieties, they tend to like Borealis, one particular winemaker.
So we'd sell them too.
And I'm thinking that Aurora might be better too with a lower acidity.